Well, obviously, after Gord's passing, time had gone on, and what kind of led you to, okay, now's the time?
Well, I think certainly for me, I think part of it was when the guys decided to bring Jake Gold back into the fold in
Mhm.
2020, and just as a kind of a, I don't know if they realized it at the time or not, but it was a kind of a restart,
Mhm.
and that sort of just gone, it just sort of started the wheels. I wouldn't say they started to turn, but they just started to kind of move a little bit. And I've been thinking about, all encompassing documentary about the band.
Mhm.
Certainly when the time wasn't right before that. And could just feel it. I think maybe in a similar ways that the guys were feeling like we should be kind of taking care of our legacy, whether it's our, masters and that kind of thing. And I was sort of thinking the same way, like, this is probably the right time to be thinking about a documentary. I was also thinking this will take years. That was the other part. Like, it isn't time for it to come out, for it to be now. But if we start now, and there you go, 4 years later.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say like the Jake coming in and the band's just starting to kind of come back together again. Seemed like
Right.
the motivating factor, Chris.
Yeah. Paul, I had read that the Universal Studios Hollywood fire kind of sparked this. Because obviously so many masters, album masters got destroyed in that, and it kind of would you say that that jump started the band kind of coming back together and kind of talking about things?
Talking about things, yes.
Yeah.
I think Johnny read some story in the New York Times and a list of, say, 100 bands or whatever, and we were on it, as potentially
Mhm.
an artist that had lost some tapes.
Right.
And so he, I think, called Robbie, who happened to be in Italy at the time, and they discussed it and then came to Gord Sinclair and I, and we're like, hey, listen, these tapes we could have lost. We need to find out what we've lost, if anything.
Mhm.
And we need to gather these tapes and have them all in the same place. In Toronto is where we wanted them, because we're signed with Universal in Toronto, and they already had a pile of tapes that we knew of. But there were LA tapes because we were signed out of LA originally
Mhm.
for our first number of records. And so Johnny's really good at it, and he made a lot of calls and was just looking for our tapes, our masters. And hard to say if we lost anything or not, because some tapes haven't been found, but there was no real record. But it did, you're right, it began the process of us having something concrete to talk about and to look for. And, as Mike said, just, started thinking and talking a bit more about the legacy. Yeah, I remember Mike approached us, and his other brother, Pat. And it was just we were still a little too foggy at the time, preserve your
Mhm.
legacy. And, it's not like we had attitude. It was just kind of like, well, we played the shows and we wrote the songs, and so isn't that enough? And a year or two after that, so we're um 3 years maybe after Gord passed away, we started talking about that. Okay, we need to find everything and get the unreleased stuff and put it out in some form, box sets or whatever. And then a little bit after that, Mike had talked to Jake, and they approached us about the idea of a documentary, and we
Sure.
felt the same way probably Mike did. This is not going to be a few months and then we're done. It's
Right.
going to be a big long process, and it was, but it was, we're lucky in the band that all we really had to do was answer questions in grueling
Mhm.
interviews with Mike in various settings, and the rest came together. And honestly, we all love it, and no one but Mike could have done it, really, because he had an
Mhm.
inside view over the course of our career. He was around and
Sure.
aware of little controversies or little tensions, and he asked us all individually about those particular stories. And I think it's a big part of the doc is seeing those troubles that we had.
Yeah. I mean, Mike, what was it like going through those hundreds of hours of interviews? Because I've been privy when I was out in Hollywood, working at Hollywood. I remember talking to some documentary makers, and they were like, "That's the best part is going through that." But for you, was this kind of because it was a lot. Your brother was there a little healing process going through all those hundreds of hours of interviews?
Yeah, well, that definitely, like, of the archive, we had hundreds of hours. We just kept
Mhm.
assembling it and trying to organize it, like, so that we could search it, kind of created a database for all the archive. And then for the new interviews, we ended up with, like, I think we did 60 interviews, including like
Yeah.
4 full days, or at least, 3.5 days with each member of the band. So we
Mhm.
had a couple of hundred hours of interview tapes, of interview hours. So, I mean, just even preparing for the interviews for me was really just a great exercise, because you just have to be really prepared. Like, you go into it with such a game plan of like, okay, this is what I want to
Mhm.
cover. I want to cover this period. I don't want to try to sit these guys down. Or we did sit down for we had a couple of days, or with Paul, 7.5 hours on camera, like, plus all the prep, and and breaking for lunch, so, which is a lot, but which requires a lot of preparation. Like, you really got to have a bit of a plan, and then with preparation allows you to be kind of to move with it as well. Oh, I think we're
Mhm.
going in this direction. We should go this way. Like, this is where he wants to go, and let's go there. So all of it was very, yeah, I think, I'll tell you a little story. When in the beginning, I remember there was the end of a long day, and there was so many days, like,
Mhm.
in the calendar already to come. And I remember just having this thought of like, I'm going to be so relieved when this part of the process is over, the interviews, which is most of the shooting, a little bit of
Yeah.
actuality, almost all interviews. And I kind of just caught myself, like, this is just an internal conversation I had. And I kind of caught myself, and I thought, if you're going to go through this, just looking at the finish line to get done, because it's a lot of work, it's emotional, mental, all those things. You're going to have missed the opportunity, which is to sit down with these guys, to talk about the band, talk about your brother. You're never getting this chance again. You
Mhm.
get to ask people to show up at a specific time and sit down and talk about all these things. You know some, you don't know a lot of it. And it was like I just kind of gave myself, I sort of gave myself a little slap and just said, no, no, you're going to, and right from that moment on, every time we sat down, I just thought, this is an opportunity. I'm never getting this again. I'm never going to have this kind of opportunity again, to ask people to really focus and talk about this part of their life, the band members especially, and really try to understand deeply about what was going on. And because I knew Gord's side of some of these things, I didn't know the other four guys' side. And of course, these things, you know,
All right. They all kind of juxtapose, and you've got to,
exactly, yeah.
yeah,
So that
exactly.
that was a special, like, that part I will always just really treasure. And we ended up doing a lot of the band interviews in this house, this beautiful old house in Kingston. You can
Okay.
see the inside of it, and they're all in the same
Oh,
place. They're
yeah.
like sort of rooms, but all. And I ended up staying. It's a beautiful house you can rent. And the guy Jason O'Brien, is kind of a friend to all, and I'd end up staying upstairs. All the rest of the crew wanted to stay at a hotel downtown, and I'm like, no, I'm staying in this old house. And so I kind of was really like, it's like something out of The Shining almost.
Yeah,
I was deep into it. I was deep into it, Chris.
sure. Paul, what was it like for you having to sit down? Like he said, you were there for 7 hours, but being able to to bring back up all these memories, and obviously kind of, you compartmentalize all these. What was it like sitting down and just going through all the years with the hip?
I mean, I'll be honest, it was difficult, and it was grueling to a certain extent. And it was sometimes felt good. Okay, that went well. The answer to that question, whatever. But sort of doubt creeping in on maybe it's a particular story that I'm aware people aren't aware of it. Like Gord's guitar playing, and how'd you feel about that? And so it had to be, by listening hard to Mike's question. I know Mike well. All of us know Mike well, which probably added to a comfort level, but also became pretty obvious fairly quickly that he wasn't going to be just asking, so was it fun? What was your favorite gig?
Right.
It was just more full on than I expected, but felt good after each sort of section of it. Because as Mike said, it would be, you're doing an interview, you're going to be here around 8 hours, and then probably in a month and a half, we're going to come back and do it again. And so it was that kind of thing. It started in our old high school, which Mike geniusly got access to. It was totally vacant. And so it kind of started, our process too started in the early years, because that's what we were kind of discussing, like the early high school years before we were a band. But everyone's various histories. And so overall it was quite a positive experience, emotional at times, which is obvious in the doc. And but yeah, it felt like work, to be honest. It was but we were all committed to doing that work, and just had no idea what Mike was going to ask next. So I felt like I had to be on the ball and really answer as honestly as I could at the time.
All right. This next question is for both of you, but I'll have Paul answer first and then you. One of the things I took out of the doc was, and it was a quote, said, "There would be no hip without Kingston." I really want to know, being that somebody who's never been to Kingston, but from the documentary, you almost feel like you are. What was so ingrained about the hip in Kingston? I mean, that, years later, you're still going back to it, and it that band still lives in that whole city, and of course the whole country.
Yeah, I mean, it's just our roots. It's hometown, all in the same high school. Knowing each other so well happened because we all were from there and knew each other pretty well in high school. And then going out from there and trying to tackle a city, an hour away, and then 2 hours, and then 3 hours the other way. And just always being motivated and committed to, we can do this. We can write songs, and we can turn on crowds, and let's just keep going. And then, as different levels of success started hitting, we just knew that, listen, we have the opportunity to raise money every time we play Kingston. So that just became part of it. And I think within the Kingston community, even back then, would get people way older than we were at the time, in our mid-20s, coming up, and businesswoman or businessman saying, "You guys do so much for this community." And so we just started and continued to do that right up until the present, and will continue if we ever have anything happening. Just trying to be responsible, upstanding members of Kingston. And Kingston really shoots well. So that was Mike. I mean, the drone shots, and it's a beautiful little town. And so, I think of the doc as you know, I mean, it's a tribute to Kingston at times as
Yeah.
well. And that's not a bad thing, you know, we
Oh,
all still have family there, and uh 3 out of 4 of us live there. And yeah, it's a big part of how we did things, I think.
yeah. What about for you, Mike? You know, would there be a hip without Kingston?
Um, it- it's a great question. I really feel that, yeah, I don't know if there would. I mean, I think there was something about this town that was so just, it's got so much history. Like, and I'm kind of a good one to talk to this about because we moved into Kingston. We lived about 10 miles down the road, and it doesn't sound like very far. I tell you, it might as well have been 1,000 miles. We didn't really know. We would come into Kingston to go to a movie, you know, like, so we
Yeah.
were kind of more country folk outside of
Mm-hmm.
town. And we moved into Kingston. I went back to high school to KCVI, where everybody went. And I'd already been out of school for a few years. I went back to KCVI. Gord was going into grade 11. That's where he met Paul. And I was going into grade 13, having been out of school for a couple of years. And I walked in there to KCVI thinking, I'm going to be like one of the oldest guys here. Like, this is going to be like shooting fish in a barrel. You know what I mean? And I swear to God, the first day, I'm like, oh, this is way different than I thought. There's a level of, it was like a John Hughes film set. I've always said it was just like, this is like on another level because at that school, and this is very Kingston, you've got doctors' kids, you've got some kids, their parents are professors at the university, which the KCVI is literally a part of the campus. It's right on the edge. Now Queens owns KCVI. Now it's in part of the campus. But so there was like, and then you have kids who's, I'm sure some their parents were prison guards because of, you know, or who knows what. So you had this group, and you had this level of what I thought was sophistication. Kids were into music on a deep level, like our old high school. There's none of the kids were musicians.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, Gord's like, "Oh, I'm trying out with this band." I'm like, "You're what? What band?" "Oh, there's a bunch of guys in grade 11." "Grade 11? And they all play instruments?" "Yeah." I mean, it was like it was kind of a miracle, and our heads were just spinning. Like, you know, Gord met Paul on the first day of school. You know, Paul's dad was the gym teacher at KCVI. He was my grade 13 gym teacher. It was just, it was like a remarkable kind of like a petri dish.
It's a perfect
A
storm.
lot of
It was
things
almost a
growing.
perfect storm. Yeah. Oh, I want to ask, you know, bands, a lot of them, they start out playing covers and it takes a while to find their voice. When do you feel that the hip finally found their voice? Was there a certain song? Was there a certain show that you say, okay, this is us?
um yeah, I mean, it took they went through different phases, you know, because they had sax player Davis Manning, and
Yeah.
great guy, and but things went south with them, and then they were a 4-piece for a little bit, half a summer. And then they asked me to join the band, so all of a sudden there was 2 guitars.
Mhm.
So this is changing little sonic aspects. And was covers, but they were writing songs, and you know, and then uh I started throwing in a song or two whenever I could or had their attention. And so, you know, I think we found it somewhat as like our early sound, um in writing and recording up to here. I think it was kind of like, okay, we're a rock band. We're based on, you know, British R&B, early 60s stuff, but also Teenage Head, which I love that that is mentioned in the documentary. And they were out of Hamilton, and whenever they came to town, we were all there. And they just had a bare bones approach that suited us watching them, and just came out naturally. And with Gord's voice and, you know, some backups, I think that's, we just started realizing, okay, and not backups on every song by any means,
Mhm.
because Sinclair and I were just polite with each other. No, you go ahead. No, you go ahead. You go ahead. And so it just kind of, turned into maybe half the songs have backups, but and just the communicating with each other started to happen through Up to Here, got stronger with Road Apples, kept getting stronger, really, fully, completely.
Yeah.
And we just didn't like, we never tried to sound like anybody. And I think that was a big key point. We just, and guys would come in with songs. We were a cover band sort of through up until Up to Here, but just slipping in some originals.
Mhm.
And we didn't want to play the modern music at the time as covers. We were playing, the Yardbirds and early Stones and Rocky, Bob Dylan tracks. It was just kind of, so we were all fans, big Bowie fans. It was just a combination of 5 people doing their best and trying to just commit and be confident in our own sound.
Sure. I mean, when you're talking about Up to Here, 35th anniversary this year, I remember my best friend, and I remember him literally coming over to my house and saying, "You have to listen to this." And it was 38 years old. And I still think it's still my favorite song just because it was the first that kind of introduced me to the hip. But Up to Here, and that song seems to really generate with people. I remember in the documentary that the several people saying that's their personal favorite, even though there's so many songs on other albums, that's the one they always go back to. What do you think about that, Paul? When 35 years ago, when still people are going to that album, and of course 38 years old, still resonates today. Showing how different that the hip were as far as their sound and their lyrics. Gord's lyrics were amazing on that.
Yeah, and apparently it got some play in the prisons at the time, as it would. There's just kind of a different thing about it when we would pull out the acoustic, yet make it rocky, like 38 years old. Well, maybe you say it's a ballad, and it kind of is, but at the same time, it's played with a rock ethos and method.
Mhm.
And like, it makes me think of these songs really stuck out for us whenever we did that, like Ahead by a Century, like, of course, We Kings and Bob Cage, and like these sort of different types of songs to New Orleans is Sinking and She Didn't Know and Little Bones. It was just another aspect that we decided we'll keep exploring that, because 38 years old, we actually wrote down in Memphis back in the hotel one night. And,
Yeah.
it's kind of like just keeping our minds open to going that kind of direction. And then we
Yeah.
just kind of kept it up with just trying to do something different than we had done in the past and not
Yeah.
repeat ourselves and be open to acoustic-y kind of songs too.
Mike, I want to ask you about that song. Had Gord ever told you, but obviously that is something that happened that Millhaven, breakout of those prisoners happened in 72. Did he ever mention of why that at that moment that came up to him, and then obviously he had to write that down and the perfect melody, obviously the perfect song.
Well, I remember when I heard it the first time, because they had just come back from Memphis, and I believe Paul and Gord were living together in Toronto at the time, because we were
Yeah.
living on Allen Road at the time, Paul.
Yeah, we were.
Took over that apartment that you guys had a part ownership in, and Gord came back and said, I want to play this song for you," and he played it, and I was blown away. But what I was really blown away by was that it really, for me, because I was 12 at the time, Gordy was 8, it really captured that feeling that we all had when we were in our house, and the prison was 3 miles down the road. And I remember telling somebody, I remember I could hear the bloodhound, like at night, lying in bed, we could hear the dogs, the bloodhounds in the surrounding fields as they were searching to pick up the scent of the inmates. It was just a very powerful experience for a child. this kind of combination of fear and excitement, because we were in a little town where nothing ever really happened. Like
Sure.
God, when we got our first like convenience store, a Becker's, I think it was a big deal. Like, so it was like we had nothing. We had a baseball diamond. Anyway, and then so I really remember like the song for me. It just really captured that this feeling of yeah, and then this guy trying to get home for whatever reason. I really I loved it, and I also kind of thought, oh, you're smart to be mining your own personal experiences, and then fictionalizing them completely. But like that's smart, like you're writing about what you, and then of course what would come later are all songs about different Canadian stories and people like that. But again, something that has yeah, you have a resonance with, a familiarity with as the songwriter and for the band. And I always thought that was, yeah, Canadian places and Canadian people, but more than that, something you really understand deeply. So you can, it's
Yeah.
not really about the story, it's more about what the feeling you can create with it because you know it so well.
Sure. I mean, fans, they even kind of thought you were the Mike in the song, did they not? A few of them did.
Well,
You know,
it is the older brother Mike, so
exactly. So,
I
um,
never did time, never murdered anybody.
exactly. What was the reason behind not playing that song? Was it because the fans were taking it too literal there, Paul? Because I know you guys kind of waned against playing that after a while.
But to be honest with you, it started to bother Gord
Okay,
Downie.
got it.
That he had name checked Mike, that it was his sister. Um, he mentions his sister. He doesn't name the sister, but
Right.
it just started to tweak him a bit, and we would be like, "Well, but everyone loves it," and you were just using, songwriter's license, and
Sure.
so it took some convincing. So then you'd resort whenever it was a song you didn't necessarily want to do, you'd say, "Well, this person likes it. It's their favorite song. Okay, we'll do it." And so yeah, I think it just made him a bit queasy, but I think he appreciated it in the end. Um,
Mhm.
but I think he just had a couple of regrets about it, even though it's just it's a great story set to really cool.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's still, like I said, I love, there's so many different songs on that, but I'll always come back to that song because it's the first one that really, that I was introduced to the band. So,
Mm.
I
Right.
know you guys got to go. But I just had a real quick couple of questions here. This one is for you, Mike. What was it like near the end, working on the secret path? Because I had no idea about that story, and it just, uh, I was enveloped by that, so I had to read everything about that story about that little kid, about him walking, trying to get back home, and all the stuff that was going on up there that obviously everybody here in the lower 48 states had nothing to do, no idea about. What was it
Yeah,
like working on
and
that?
most people in Canada, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was, I mean, yeah, I mean, to say it was a passion project for Gord it doesn't quite cover it, because he just became kind of consumed with it, and it also was around for years. Like first heard the story in 2012, and Gord made the record, I think the next year in 2013, and then we kind of had this agreement that, or realization, Gord did, that he would wait till the 50th anniversary of Channing, like to get the most people aware of it. And then
yeah,
crazy enough, by that time that rolls around, the Hip are on their final tour, and Gord has a terminal diagnosis. Like that part is all kind of, it's kind of hard for me to really even put all the pieces together because it was, the album, the graphic novel, and then the
mhm,
documentary animated film. That's all over 3 or 4 years. When it finally comes out, Gord has the attention of half the country, and that's what really I think made it kind of explode in people's minds, non-indigenous people like that hadn't
sure,
come across a story like that. And it's a powerful story, and as it turns out, I think it was something between the Hips final tour and Gord getting out there and performing Secret Path, and getting it out. Those were just, I think, the two sort of his two professional final acts that had to have given him a lot of comfort, like in
Mhm.
terms of achievement. So
Yeah.
huge.
And it's huge. It was an amazing project. I was blown away by it. It just, like I said, off down here, and then of course Canadian people did not know this story, and it's just a heartbreaking story to listen. But I'm glad that he was able to get that story out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last question for you, Paul. What was it like being able to watch the documentary? You and then you're speaking for the band members. What were they? What was their feedback from watching this? When it was all said and done.
Like personal feedback, it was a bit overwhelming, but a lot comes back, and I get that feedback from friends like that were around all the time, regardless of the city they were watching in,
Mm-hmm.
that it brings them back pretty immediately, especially that the early half, episode 1 and 2, and just sort of, hey, I was around for that. And because everyone watches movies that way, and listen to music that way, they kind of remember that it brings it back where they were, what things were like, and the feedback's been incredible. And I think there's a reason for it, because it's no straight up story. There's lots of ups and downs. There's lots of times of trouble and tension, and there's lots of success and achievement and togetherness and love. So and it's really Mike has woven a great story that you can just watch. It's like you almost want more of it. So couldn't ask for any better feelings about it than I have. And I think I would speak for the band too. Just like, it's like, this is great. It's great that this story was told how it was told, and it's the truth. And hey, so then we can we just have that.